Did you know that there was a time when the plains of North America were filled with animals? You could just stand over the plain and watch an endless herd of animals moving around, and you wouldn't even see the end of the troop. The most iconic and indigenous one is called the American bison. In the 17th century, over 30 million bison could be found roaming around the large expanse of North America. It sounds impressive, right? But the story changes a few centuries down the line. The bison on the plains reduced drastically, and you can now only find a fraction of that number on the whole continent. From about 30 to 60 million bison dwelling on the plain, it was reduced at some point to about 1,000. What happened? Was it a natural decline or something that humans had a hand in? If you're curious as to why this happened, then this video is for you. We'll journey through history to uncover how colonization and industrialization nearly drove the American bison to extinction. Let's unravel it together. Long before skyscrapers and superhighways became a thing, bison were the rulers of the Great Plains. They made up the larger population of livestock on the land and had an impact on nearly everything available at that time. They filled the grassland, kept ecosystems running, and formed the culture of the people at the time. For the indigenous peoples of the plains, like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche, the bison was everything. Food, clothing, shelter, tools, and even spiritual meaning were derived from this single animal. It was a symbiotic relationship, rooted in deep respect. The bison represented more than just an animal. It was a life source, a symbol of abundance, and in many ways a sacred being. But things took a dark turn when European colonizers arrived in the 18th and 19th centuries. When European colonizers arrived, they were stunned by the size and scale of the bison herds. Early explorers wrote of being unable to see the end of a herd that stretched for miles. It was mind-blowing to them. They could not comprehend the essence that was attached to these animals, and it also looked like there was an endless supply of it. So with colonization also came change. Different people with different worldviews came to dwell together, and the change was not nice for the bison. The Europeans brought horses to North America. You don't think that was a bad idea, right? I mean, what hurt could the gorgeous horses cause to the heavy, majestic bison? History had a different tale to tell. This development initially seemed harmless, with the bison coexisting alongside the horses, till the Indians started using the horses as a means to hunt down bison faster. The introduction of horses revolutionized the way indigenous people hunted bison, and firearms increased efficiency. Initially, the herds remained robust, but the balance was beginning to shift. People had a faster and more efficient means to hunt down the bison. It became an enjoyable sport, and as you've probably guessed by now, things soon went overboard. European settlers began to view the bison not as sacred, but as a resource to be exploited, and with that mindset, the seeds of destruction were sown. By the early 19th century, Plains Indians and traders started eradicating hundreds of thousands of bison at an alarming rate. In 1840, they eradicated almost 500,000 bison for survival, selling their hides on the market. To make matters worse, the widespread use of horses meant the Indians would compete with the bison for grazing, which had an impact on the population of the animals. The population of horses was growing dramatically, while that of the bison was reducing exponentially. There was also a shift in perspective on how the people viewed these two animals. The horses were regarded as an exotic breed of animals that could pass as a show of power, wealth, and resources, and could also be used as machinery for transportation and for hunting. Meanwhile, the perspective surrounding the bison began to shift from a culturally indigenous part of the populace to an effective tool for building commercialism. The bison was such an iconic animal that every part of it was useful. By the mid-1800s, bison hides were in high demand in industrial markets. Their tough leather was used for belts to run machines in factories. Their bones were ground for fertilizer and sugar refining. Then industrialization brought in the development of railroads, which opened up the West to settlers, traders, and, of course, trophy hunters. Some trains were even advertised as hunting trips, where passengers could target bison from the comfort of their seats. The decimation was staggering, with millions of bison being eliminated, and by 1884, there were fewer than 1,000 left in the wild. The bison weren't just doomed by rifles and railroads of the Europeans and Indians, but also by cultural disconnect. Their human predators saw land as something to conquer and animals to be preyed on, and within the blink of an eye, an animal that was once the pride of the North American plains was now reduced to a few beating hooves. The American bison became an endangered species. What was once viewed as an endless supply became almost extinct, thanks to humans not knowing when to stop with their exploitative behavior. So what do you think happens when you remove 30 million bison from an ecosystem within a few hundred years? Everything changes. Nature is all about balance, and the constant extermination of the bison had created an imbalance in the ecosystem that affected everything the people of North America held dear. Before proper attention to the negative effects of mass elimination of bison gained traction, things had gotten really bad. In fact, there was imminent danger looming over the continent. Without bison grazing and aerating the soil, the vast grasslands began to degrade. Certain plants became overgrown, while others vanished. Entire ecosystems started collapsing. From prairie dogs to insects, the ripple effects were massive. And for native communities, the loss of bison meat meant starvation, displacement, and spiritual trauma. Children grew up without the songs, ceremonies, and skills passed down through generations. The fall of the American bison wasn't just an environmental tragedy. It was a cultural one, a deliberate act of erasure. The government also had a part to play in this tragedy. By the 1870s, the mass eradication of bison wasn't just about profit or sport. It became part of a calculated effort to undermine indigenous resistance to U.S. expansion. The bison was central to the survival of many plains tribes. Food, clothing, tools, housing, and spiritual identity all depended on it. U.S. officials and military leaders recognized this. By wiping out the bison, they could effectively force native tribes onto reservations, removing their autonomy and breaking their resistance. The trick was as old as colonization itself. It is simple. Take away what the people hold dear to their hearts and give them something else to worry about. It was a strategic step to make the people embrace civilization, the way of the West, and of course, give more power to the colonial masters. General Philip Sheridan, a leading figure in the Indian Wars, reportedly said, "Let them hunt, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated, as it is the only way to bring lasting peace and allow civilization to advance." The speed of eradication became uncontrolled. At the height of the frenzy, 1870s through 1880s, it's estimated that up to 5,000 bison were lost per day. Entire herds were decimated using long-range rifles like the .50 caliber Buffalo firearm. Hunters would target dozens of animals at once and harvest only the hides, leaving the rest to rot. In many areas, piles of bones from millions of carcasses were collected and sold as fertilizer, or even used to make buttons, glue, and china. It also had a domino effect on nature. The bison shaped the very structure of the American prairies. They scratched trees with their horns, keeping meadows open. They rolled in the dust, creating shallow pits, which later turned into seasonal wetlands. Their group grazing left a patchwork of grass heights that supported a variety of animal species. But after their near extinction, a lot of things changed in nature. Short, resilient grasses were replaced by taller, weaker varieties that couldn't handle the dry climate. Cattle that were brought in as replacements overgrazed and couldn't serve the same ecological benefits, leading to more damage to the soil. The fall of the American bison didn't just echo through indigenous cultures or the food chain, it rippled through the soil itself. And then came another natural disaster, the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, which impacted the Great Plains of the United States, affecting some states like Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and Colorado. The Dust Bowl was estimated to have wiped out 850 million tons of topsoil straight into the Atlantic Ocean in 1935 alone. This wasn't just a drought, it was an ecological disaster, but it was also a wake-up call. The Dust Bowl was one of the worst environmental disasters in American history, and it had roots in both natural weather patterns and human land misuse, especially the removal of bison and native grasses that once stabilized the Great Plains ecosystem. With the bison gone and native grasses plowed under wheat fields, the land lost its armor. Prairie grasses with roots several feet deep once held the soil in place, even through dry spells, but shallow-rooted crops and constant tilling left the land exposed, and then came the drought. What followed were massive dust storms, so powerful they were called black blizzards. They rolled across the plains, turning day into night, choking families inside their homes, and blowing an estimated 850 million tons of topsoil straight into the Atlantic Ocean. One eyewitness said, "It felt like the end of the world, like the sky itself had collapsed." Families fled in droves. Over 3.5 million people became climate refugees, many heading west with everything they owned strapped to old cars. It wasn't just poor farming that caused it. It was a collapse of an ecosystem that once thrived under bison hoofs. So, in a way, the Dust Bowl wasn't just a weather crisis, it was nature's response to our exploitative interference. It was evident that something needed to be done urgently, but what could be done to save land from degradation after so many years of exploitation? Wildlife was now in danger. The vegetation was also far gone. What was the way forward from here? The journey from degradation to recovery was not a smooth one, and it is a process that is still in motion to this date. But in the 1930s, a movement started to facilitate the journey towards recovery. Not everyone was content to let the bison vanish. When things began to get bad, a few individuals, both indigenous and settlers, began efforts to save the remaining animals. One of them was William Hornaday, who worked with the Smithsonian to create a captive breeding program. Indigenous communities, particularly the Lakota and Blackfeet, also began forming their small herds. Nationally, efforts to save the bison began with just 25 bison protected in Yellowstone National Park, which grew to a staggering 5,900 by 2022. Scientists and conservationists slowly began to rebuild and pay more attention to the bison population. The American Prairie Foundation, APF, in Montana is currently leading one of the most ambitious efforts toward bison restoration. Since 2005, they've been buying and leasing land to reconnect wildlife corridors. By 2024, their reserve covered over 526,000 acres, with plans to restore over 3 million acres in total. Today, roughly 1,000 bison roam this land. With carefully managed breeding programs, they can ensure genetic diversity and long-term survival. 80 new bison were being introduced from herds in Colorado and Montana in 2023. This project led to the birth of new calves in 2024 from those bloodlines. The bison are scientifically known to make the soil healthier, and it has even been proven by the Konza Prairie Biological Station in Kansas. Researchers ran a 30-year experiment comparing the effects of bison grazing, cattle grazing, and no grazing at all. They found that areas grazed by bison saw an 86% increase in plant diversity compared to cattle-grazed land, which saw only a 30% increase, and ungrazed land, which suffered from dominance by just a few species. The difference? Bison helped ecosystems grow from extreme and harsh weather conditions in 2011 and 2012 by selectively grazing dominant grasses, allowing rare plants to flourish. All these just tell us that everything nature gave to us, every wildlife resource that we have at our disposal, is meant to be preserved for our lives on this planet, Earth. As much as they can be sources of nutritional and commercial benefits, we must never forget to play our part in conserving these natural resources. There has to be a balance. If we have learned anything from the history of the fall of the American bison, it should be that humans should learn to manage their ambitions and never push them beyond the shores of nature's natural order. It never ends well. And it is much better to learn from history than to go through a modern-day dust bowl. Now, what does the future hold for the American bison? A lot. The fall of the American bison wasn't just about animals, it was about power, identity, and survival. And yet, their story isn't over. Despite the drastic depletion of the bison's population, effort is being put into ensuring they don't go into extinction. Bison are more than placeholders of our history. They're crucial to our environmental wellness. Restoring their presence would help us bring back balance, biodiversity, and resilience to the lands we depend on. So the next time you see a bison, never forget that you're looking at a survivor and a symbol of resilience. If you take anything from the story of the fall of the American bison, know this: you could bounce back from anything as well. Anyway, until next time, let me know what you think in the comments below, and please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories from the edge of history and nature.